brief introduction to a man who I say is a sort of a Renaissance man. He wears many hats, and to very quickly review some of the association we've had with him. Uh, we weren't around for his days as a heart surgeon, a brilliant heart surgeon, I'm told. And we weren't around also for the 4 years he was in the Syrian parliament. And we weren't around for the years that he also started a think tank affiliated with the foreign ministry in Syria that was an Orient Center on International Relations. And at some point, after a fight that was brutal against barrel bombs and carnage of the Assad regime, he fled, perhaps with the hair of his chinny chin chin, with family, with friends, and started a brilliant think tank in Dubai. And that think tank in Dubai was one of the institutions that we discovered in our annual search whenever the Ibrahim Program travels to the Middle East for people doing uncommonly courageous and impactful things, institutions and people. And the Orient Research Center that Samir was the founder, the director of, was one of these finds. And it turned out that after several years, the think tank itself that we discovered as a thread of hope in this great unraveling of the modern Middle East said, hey, you're our thread of hope. Your students that come here are smart, committed, and we're learning from them. And it gives us a sense that there is hope in the world in the next generation, not the next war. And so Samir and the program became close, cooperative, and it turns out that Samir has been working a very long time on an issue that he's going to address today. And what the significance is in the United Arab Emirates initiative, along with a receptive Israeli government, to work out a deal to move on a pathway towards what they refer to as normalization. Is this a Sadat-like moment? Is my question as I'm watching this unfold. I've been watching for years now the post-Sadatal blues, as I call it, play out in Israel, waiting for another leader with courage in the Arab world. Unfortunately, Israel has not produced such a leader since Rabin and perhaps Olmert. And we've had stasis, stagnation in the Middle East. And so without further ado, other than one brief comment about Samir's illustrious career, he's now sitting in the United States, not too far from Cleveland in Ohio. And he's still got incredible contacts on the ground. I'm sure many of them that he'll talk about and share with us. But I think what his medical and health history has played for me in such a dramatic way is as a healer. And that in the Middle East, it's hard enough to draw lines on a map to distinguish where borders of states old and new should be. But without having an inner cartography of the human heart, without people that are prepared to support this on the ground in both publics, we're going nowhere. And Samir is really a man that has this cartography of the human heart that goes with bold ideas and big thinking. And Samir, I turn it over to you in your healing ways.
Yes, thank you very much. Actually, believe me, I'm really humbled. I hope that I would be capable of really being at the level, at a quarter of the level he, Mark described about me. You know, I'm sorry again for my maybe sometimes weak English expression. So please accept me as I am. So let me say something very important for me. I think this moment is one of those most important moments for me, that I think that I had been awarded, because it had been a task that not myself, only myself, but many of my colleagues in the diplomatic research intellectuals in Syria, and believe it or not, people were really looking very cautiously, very much afraid to jump, but still very much willing to embark in an operation to close the Arab-Israeli conflict. And I think what happened now is for us a reward. And because not only we think that what we are experiencing in this tumultuous period and tumultuous region is that, in fact, we are still not getting out of the post-Ottoman Empire collapse. Still many borders are not settled. Still many states are not yet defined. And I think what had happened now was very much important as a factor for stabilization. I would profit from this occasion to ask all my young colleagues, be stubborn defending peace. This deserve. You will be saving thousands and thousands of lives and really paving the way toward prosperity. So we should be stubborn, we should be hard-headed, and we should sneak, work in a very discreet ways to dismantle and really fragment those who are living the factors and the buildup and the structures which are really living on the conflict. Because in this region, as long as dictators are still having a deep well of discourse and of stories and grievances, just taking, living on those wells and bringing histories and etc. And this is the way on which the whole, those old dictators were able to rule the region. As long as we keep those conflicts aflame, ignited, those dictators and those totalitarian regimes will continue to be there and live on as parasites on the conflict. And mainly, I would say, even external powers. I was at a certain moment very close to the Russian diplomacy in parallel to my medical career. And I was totally convinced that the Russians do not want to solve the conflict. There had been lots of opportunities that had been sabotaged by the Russians. And they are very much happy. They live as scavengers, living on the cadaver of the conflict. So this is quite an introduction. I'll jump now to begin to try to present to you something more academic. Meaning that the way we analyze every important event is we begin by putting, first of all, the general strategic framework that was settled before the event. And then we try to analyze the event itself, and then we will try to analyze the repercussions of this event. So let me say something. At a certain moment, it was obvious for the American administrations that this region is so unstable, and after the collapse of Soviet Union, there had been no more reason to keep on all those regimes that are really, especially after 9/11, really oppressing their people, really corrupt. They are really left behind in the assessment of the UNDP development, etc., etc. So those regimes were going to collapse. And what had happened in the Arab Spring is that the rent economy, which was the basis of those crony state capitalist regimes, were collapsing. And especially in Syria and Lebanon, in Sinai, and in Egypt, etc. So at a certain moment, there had been this perception in the among the American strategists that only the political Islam will be capable of rehandling or reorganizing the situation. I remind you now about the visit of Mr. Obama to Cairo, the visit to Turkey, and the speeches he made, where he practically delegated the political Islam and to Turkey the handling of the repercussions of the Arab Spring in those countries. And there had been some hope that Erdogan would be capable of dealing with the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood and the Islamists in Syria, etc. But then this didn't happen. And practically there had been this major shift from even Mr. Obama's administration toward Iran. Meaning when he began the negotiations about the JCPOA, one of the main letters that he addressed Khamenei to, that had been published by the New York Times, where he was saying that the United States will not try to upheaval Bashar al-Assad in Syria, which means in a way or another that the JCPOA was accepting and basing its strategic framework on surrendering Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon practically to an Iranian influence. From the other side, some influence of the Sunni Islamic through the Turkish line. So for the Gulf region, this was very dangerous. We have two Islamist strategic alliances. One is Shia and the other is Sunni, Turkish, Qatari, etc. And for them, this was very much destabilizing for their regimes and their future even. Because, you know, the need for change in the Middle East and in the Gulf, and the systemic and structural change in those regimes is very much essential. And they know they are embarking in this. Look, there is this introversion of Saudi Arabia now, and there are lots of those who live in those countries, like Zash or whoever, will know that in fact there is a real change there. And they are very much afraid that under the bridges on which those countries will be bridging toward the change, the Iranians and the Islamists, the Turks, will come and put their minds under those bridges. So from this point of view, there had been a kind of loss of weight in the region, and willing to rebuild, to stabilize the region in a way that would prevent those two big lines or strategic pillars from profiting from this. So I'm speaking about here exactly about the incentive behind this. So on the other line, we have the United States. I think the United States was beginning to return to the region, not in terms of direct involvement or sending powers, but at a certain moment, the way we perceived what's happening in the region was that the Americans are not only withdrawing physically, but even withdrawing spiritually and strategically, and their interest is no more concentrated. I think here, there is a change. Now, America is healing its immunity. We felt in the region that there had been an attitude of, laissez-faire, let things happen. What if the Russians would take Syria and Egypt? What if the Iranians take those three? So there had been a kind of nonchalance. Now we feel that the United States is regaining its immunity, regaining its. There is a return in the whole world into geostrategia. And it's not only economic relations, it's not only direct economic interest. Geostrategy is returning to the world, and including the United States, which is now trying to reestablish its position. So in this climate, there had been lots of loss of weight for the United Arab Emirates. From the other side, I think the Israelis, always they say, they continue to eat popcorn, as I say always, meaning that they look at their entourage totally collapsing, and they think, we are not part of this region, and we are rather Europeans, and we don't need to be involved in anything. This is such a savage and chaotic region that we don't need to be part of it. But this was not a very successful thinking, because at the end of the day, by the collapse of the Arab world, which was trying to negotiate with Israel, now Turkey is facing itself with two big indirect neighbors with major demographic weight, Iran and Turkey, and that are not in good terms with Israel. So in this condition, the strategic situation around Israel was not very much friendly. The other fact is that, in spite, there had been a major success in the domestic experience of the development and the. I'm not now in a situation to speak about the success of Israel in building the nation building, which is an immense experience. I think we need to appreciate it, but at the same time, it began to be very much obvious that the Israel cannot keep on being isolated from the region. And you are seeing what is happening in Syria, the bombardments, and sometimes in Lebanon, and etc. So lots of dangers were just increasing day by day for the geostrategic perception of Israel itself. We have here for Israel, there had been practically the capability of Mr. Netanyahu to implement and really to go through the deal of the century was practically stopped. At the same time, the annexation was very much resisted. So in those conditions, I think Israel needed to find an outlet of this impasse. Because at the end of the day, sure, Mr. Netanyahu is still attached to the idea of annexation, but I think Israel had been built on a fact, which is the international approval by the international law. And now, when Mr. Trump and all over the world, there is a kind of a dismantling of the international order. I think it would be dangerous for Israel to jump into the logic of force and change the status in the West Bank, which will undermine lots of the legitimacy of a future development and its role in the region. and even at the international level, the Europeans were resisting, Canada was resisting, Russia was resisting, etc. So this was the strategic perception of Israel, according to my discussion with many Israeli colleagues, is that better to stabilize, to try to stabilize the situation in the region, rather than keep on looking at it that we are out just like living in Mars or living outside of this region. So there is a need to engage. From the other side, we have the economic crisis. We have the repercussions of COVID. COVID is not only, is not a medical crisis. It's rather a socio-economic crisis with a medical manifestation, which means that it had catalyzed, it had accelerated many socio-economic crises all over the region that will also destabilize the region. Meaning that we are now, my prediction is that we are now embarking in a period of more and more instability in the region. If you look at the governance issue now is becoming a main tool and main argument among the intellectuals in the Middle East, especially in the Arab world. Would it be in Egypt? Would it be in Sudan? Would it be even in Ethiopia, which is not an Arab country, and even in Nigeria? So we have, and it is also already in Saudi Arabia, it is already in United Arab Emirates. The economic crisis and the decrease of the price of petrol had created real problem in terms of the, as I said, crony state capitalism. The model is no more capable of surviving. And in addition to that, you have the fact that after COVID, there had been a shrinkage in the international economy, and there is no big hope that the prices of oil will rise again. But at the same time, we have, this would mean for the Gulf that the Gulf will become a much more important, strategic important area, because this is where you can exploit the cheapest kind of, the cheapest oil in the world, which means that at the end of the day, if you want to buy a cheap oil, you have to go to the Gulf, which means that there will be more and more international competition about the control and about the influence in the Gulf, which means that again, China and the United States will be in a level of friction. And this is happening in every day. If you look at the port of Djibouti, if you look at the maritime security in the Arab Sea, if you look at the new alignments that are going on in the region, this would explain why this region is threatened not only by internal drastic tectonic changes and maybe chaos and maybe collapse of other states in the region, but rather also it's becoming more and more interesting again for the great powers that it would become again a center for international competition. So in fact, here, as I said, in the region, there are two main lines of action, which are the pillars of the strategic pillars of the region, which are mainly the Turkish and Iranian, who are exploiting Islamic fanaticism and dedicated to and based on anti-Western, anti-Israeli, anti-Jewish, and even anti-Semitic level. And from the other side, those countries were looking at their future and that this is a threat for them. And there had been a tendency by the United States to rebuild something as a strategic alliance, which was called the Middle East or the Gulf MENA, Middle East new NATO. And there have been many attempts since the beginning. Israel attended those military meetings, and there have been the meetings related to the century, the deal of the century. There have been, but in fact, the dynamics which were the United States was trying to foster were mainly related to the need to recreate a certain strategic pillar to stabilize the region and to build a kind of coordination between different, let's say, delegated countries in the region to defend the countries. Because as we perceive the American strategy, they don't want to be involved directly in this area. They would rather support delegated powers, delegated alliance to stabilize the region. The United States is not relying, for example, for a long time, we did have, as I said in my lecture before your students in Dubai, that there is a collapse of the, and the United States itself is pushing this process of the collapse of the Bretton Woods system. Suddenly we are seeing pirates in the seas and real chaos in protecting the international trade. This is because the United States wanted some partners to come and share the burden regarding protecting and regulating the international maritime security. In this situation, the maritime security is becoming more and more important, and United Arab Emirates is seeing itself as a potential maritime power that could share and participate in this system with India and with Israel in the Red Sea. So there is a strategic perception that this region, we need to compensate, in this region, we need to compensate the geostrategic gap created by the collapse of the Arab pillar. And in this situation where the United States is seeking new alliances. So I think the main idea here is about stabilization. It's about, speaking about the Palestinian issue, to end my intervention, I think the Palestinians themselves at a certain moment wanted to totally control their decision making, which is good. But by this, they risk the fact that the Arab countries, they can't stay behind them, waiting for them to shape any kind of peace according to their, different considerations, including the personal considerations of leaders, and keep the region inflamed and totally taken by this conflict, just because of really the freezing that the Palestinian Authority had made to the whole peace process. So there had been a widely supported idea that for what are we waiting? The Palestinians are refusing to negotiate. Of course, there is some responsibility on the Israelis. This is well known. But at the end of the day, you need a dynamic, and you need an Arab role. I think this agreement that could reach the level of a strategic shift is meant also to reintroduce the Arabs in the Arab-Israeli discordance, let's say. I'm no more speaking about conflict. I think there is a conflict with the Palestinians, but it's no more. We cannot describe it as a conflict between the Arabs. So to end my intervention, I think this would have much more repercussions than we can imagine. There is a new strategic alignment in the region that will be generating new paradigms and new scenarios, and it is much beyond what is being said yet. Even in, I was reading Haaretz and reading many others, Israeli and Gulf papers. I think it would have much beyond repercussions, much beyond that was expected. But still, it is very dangerous. So the repercussions could be positive, but could be very negative. And unless we give this agreement some flesh and make it a real process that would have give it a momentum that would enroll in all over the region, I think there are dangers that they will have major dangerous repercussions in the region. It would be another failing peace process, peace line. It is a great opportunity to begin to close this deep wound based on a minimum of agreement, and then we can build on it, and really mutual interest, as I tried to explain. The game was played in a very successful way because it took in account even the direct interest of rulers in Israel and direct interest of rulers in the United Arab Emirates. So on different levels, it had the resonance was working in the appropriate direction, and this what had happened. What I need to end with is we need really a very powerful action, diversified, multi-layered, to support this and to turn it into a reality, an irrevocable reality. Sorry for taking too much time.
I think the big outstanding question you've left us with, and we assume that you're assuming that the Arab world in the Gulf, with the exception perhaps of one or two states, will enthusiastically at some point join the Emiratis.
Yes.
And could you explain a little bit more the intentionality and the enlightened self-interest that those rulers will feel? Because you have a big picture here, and the big picture here is sort of glossing over what some of the individual incentives were, even for the Emiratis at this stage, and for a particular crown prince. Could you talk a little bit about what incentivized him to do what he did, and why you're so sure that there will be a following in the Arab world, slowly but surely, to build up a new team?
I think the incentives are mainly how to stand before those two fanatic lines, using political Islam as a destabilizing factor, and even the fact that all dictators in the region are living on the well of hatred generated by keeping this and those stories and the conspiracy theories about the Jews, about the West, etc., to perpetrate this region. This is one. This is really important. And if we look at, what is the real thing behind the crisis between Qatar and the four Gulf nations. I think this is the soul of it, that you are destabilizing the region in favor of more fanatism, more Islamic extremism, etc. This is one. The second is maybe people will think that will serve Mr. Trump, but at the contrary. One of the calculations here, and I can say for sure that one of the calculations, what if Trump goes? And he returned, and the new administration will return to delegate to political Islam with Qatar and Turkey, and and Iran will be again delegated in the region, as it was accepted since 2004 after the assassination of, factually in 2007, when the United States practically supported the return and the total domination of Hezbollah in Lebanon, and which meant that Iran was playing in the region overtly and really hegemonizing the region. So there had been strategic thinking about what about tomorrow, what if Trump doesn't win, and if he doesn't win, then there will be more fluid situation where you need more stable alliances and a stabilization factor. And the other factor also is related to the increasing pressure from the United States also regarding China, because at a certain moment, the redefining of the positioning of the United Arab Emirates, I think, in terms of the maritime security and trade and role in the region, the United Arab Emirates was very much targeted by the Chinese and the Americans, just like they had made with Israel itself, when they made direct pressure to prevent the infiltration of the Chinese within strategic services. The same was happening in the Gulf. So you have to take, in this confrontation, you have to take to think about what would be the future of the region as a whole. And that's why I think, in a way or another, it's a choice that had been made toward also stabilization of the region. Of course, we have to understand that, once I was walking in some corridors of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and one of the leaders, I don't want to mention the names, in the United Arab Emirates, he pointed to me and said, look, this is the best secular man in the Arab world. He spoke about me, which means secularism is beginning, regardless of, lots of traditions and habits and social necessities. The secularism in a very, maybe British way, where religion do have its role in the society, but not in the politics. This is a guiding logic in the mentality. And from the other side, of course, I would speak for a long time about the cooperation with Israel in terms of technology, in terms of COVID, in terms of military, and in terms of intelligence that had been going on, but it was very fragile and vulnerable unless you would give it a real bone, a real a backbone that will make it more stabilized. And this is what had happened.
Why don't we open it up with your last statement and let others ask a question?
About Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, if we speak other countries, I think Oman will go soon. Bahrain will go soon. The powerful presence of the Muslim Brotherhood in Kuwait could delay this happening, but the main issue is about Saudi Arabia. I think Saudi Arabia would be ready, would be as pragmatic, as secularist, entre guillemets. I don't know, it's very difficult to speak about secularism in Saudi Arabia, but at the end of the day, there is this tendency to de-weaponize Islam, even in Saudi Arabia. So, but for Saudi Arabia, you need to address its perception about its position in the Islamic world. And I think if I was advising the Israeli government, I would put a list of measures, small steps that would allow really the Saudis to see a major interest in embarking. We can go through different steps. You know, lots of them would be symbolic, but will be very much awaited by Saudis. I'm in contact with Saudis, and practically, I think they are waiting for something special for them. They don't want in any case, they won't just run behind the Emiratis. They will go by themselves. We need to create their own incentives, which are very much symbolic and moral.
Can this work with an end run around the Palestinian question?
No, and I think this is the main thing now. I think Israel needs to accept the principle that the Arabs could help to end the deadlock about the Palestinian situation. For example, Israel could be a bridge, and this agreement could be a bridge toward better investment in the economy in the West Bank, more wise approach to the situation in Gaza, really fostering development, economic prosperity, and allowing many different types of business activities within the West Bank, and subsequently encourage Israel and encourage the Palestinians to embark in a better situation. Actually, if you look at the discourse of the two, most probably the two men who are the most possible successors to Mr. Abbas, I think both of them have a discourse about regaining or reinstituting the peace process and embarking. I was very close, you know, I worked since the beginning of the peace process with the Palestinians, and with the Syrians, of course. I was in the backbench, and I can tell you what's left if we return back to what Yasser Arafat was discussing with Rabin, the late Rabin, and Olmert. We are left with some strategic points, but still of disagreement. But there are very, very small areas of land, you know, maybe some dozens of square kilometers. It's not logic to keep the whole conflict inflaming, the whole region inflaming, without solving those problems that could be solved and had been solved through diplomacy in many, many, many other situations. And we did have lots of you know, alternatives to find solutions that would preserve the, take in account the concerns of Israel from one side, and from the other side, make life viable in the West Bank. I think now the Arabs had returned to the Palestinian issue. They, after they had been practically ousted by the fanatic and those people who are saying that you just stay on the door and wait us to come when we will permit you to come and build up relations with Israel. I think what the main step here is that it's not a bypass, it's a bridge. It's not bypassing. And the Palestinians will have to change their attitude vis-a-vis reopening the peace process. Of course, Israel is in its has a big responsibility here. They need to be welcoming this and reciprocate this with a positive attitude. I hope this step also could have an impact in the mood of the Israeli strategists.
Why don't we open it up more, Nick, for anybody else that would like to join in?
Hi. Hi. Thank you so much for speaking with us. It's great to see you again. So
Thank you very
you
much.
kind of touched on this idea of like growing secularism in the region. And I'm keeping in mind when we were in the UAE on our last cohort session, we actually got to meet some of the Jewish minority community in the UAE. So how do you think that this agreement will impact those communities in the Middle East, as well as communities that are coming in from the Middle East into Israel? And how do you think this will impact migration as well? Do you think that there will be more of the normalization of Arabs moving into what is known as Israel, or do you think that will still be kind of like a taboo?
I didn't understand exactly your last question. Do you think that the Arabs could return to Israel to immigrate to Israel?
Yeah, generally like migration. So the aspect of like Emiratis, well, maybe Emiratis isn't the best example, but Omanis, for example, moving to Israel for work or moving to Israel for business or something along those lines. Do you think that would be more normalized?
I think till now, the perspectives are mainly about business, about military cooperation. So it's very elitic. Elite only is now dealing with each other, businessmen. Maybe now there is an overcrowded activity in the tourist business in Israel about going and spending a month or 2 weeks in Dubai. I know this, all those factors, but I don't see any real immigration. Otherwise, in terms of the public acceptance, I think you will be surprised. What this step had made, it broke a very thin ice, but it was very necessary, very much necessary to break it, to just allow different phenomena to happen. You will be surprised by the numbers of Syrians, by the numbers of Egyptians, and who would be open if we can give this a momentum, because this had, you know, the attitude, or the opportunistic attitude of the regimes in Jordan and Egypt after the peace agreement was, you know, you people, you are not concerned by this agreement, you are not supposed to be involved, and they were encouraging them to boycott the normalization as a part of their, as I said, their well of discourse and grievances they wanted to keep on living on it. But now it's not related to any of this. It's not related to any of the factors that made Egypt and Jordan. It's a simple acceptance of let's deal with the region as it is and try to make a more sustainable relation and sustainable peace. Because here, that's also the responsibility of Israel, is to make a sustainable peace, not something, not just bury, as we say in Arabic, grazes the fire under the sand, and then suddenly it will erupt again after 20 years. We need to level the conflict, and there are ways now. What the price is very, very, very small in terms, if we compare it to the huge strategic repercussions.
Can I ask a question? I would like to push back against what the UAE benefits from this deal. I fully understand what Israel gets from it. Israel gets normalized relations. Israel is able to say that they made peace with another Arab country following in Egypt and Jordan. But what you mentioned in terms of the UAE now getting these ties, now getting greater military sharing, they had it before. And furthermore, if what the UAE, I mean, it was essentially the worst kept secret in the Middle East. Everyone knew Israeli companies were operating in the UAE. There was intelligence sharing, there was military ties. The Israeli companies would go in Dubai and say, we're from Singapore, we're from Geneva, but everyone really knew that they were Israeli. I guess if you're saying that the UAE did this in order to try to make peace, it seems as if the evidence runs to the contrary, because if they wanted to make peace, why give Israel everything that it wanted from the outset without any commitments on its own? The original understanding in the Arab world was that if you wanted to get if you wanted to get normalized relations with the Arab world, Israel would have to progress somewhat on the Palestinian issue. So I guess the goalposts changed. It used to be you make some sort of peace agreement. Now, in exchange for the peace agreement, you'll get relations with the Arab states. And now what the UAE basically did, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that in exchange for not annexing, so now we're back to square one. Doesn't it just empower Netanyahu? And I don't see, and furthermore, doesn't it just destroy the leverage that the UAE had with the Palestinians? There's an element with Dahlan as well, but I think I would just want to push back that this inserts the UAE as peacemaker. Seems as if the UAE was doing this for their own reasons that he didn't really address.
No, actually, I didn't say that the Emirates is making peace now. You said that I said this. I didn't say it.
In order to fight fanaticism, can't one make an argument that this increases the fanaticism?
Let me return just one point. First of all, it's not about peace, it's about stabilization. First of all. Second, the United Arab Emirates did not have any leverage on the Palestinians. And the Arab countries, including Saudi Arabia, did not have any leverage on the negotiating process and all the political process in Palestine. Everybody among the young Palestinians were waiting after Abbas era that something could happen. So it's not, I'm saying that this is, first of all, because of the need for strategic alliance, stabilization facing the Turkish and the Iranian intrusions in the region and trying to hegemonize the region, and to build up, to foster and empower practically what the Americans were trying to do, which was mainly based on the NATO, Middle East NATO. So the perception is not related that this will bring peace. What will bring peace is definitely the Palestinian-Israeli negotiation, and waiting waiting the Palestinians to do it without having any share with them, any discussion with them. There have been real discussions between the United Arab Emirates and the Arab countries with the Palestinians about the path of peace since more than 10 years. Nothing. And they are sending their, who can explain to me what is the agenda behind sending young people in Gaza to be killed by the Israeli army without any possible agenda, without any feasible agenda? Of course, they are suffocated. I know, but what is the agenda? What can you achieve from this? So the point is not related. Nobody is pretending that this will bring peace or make peace with Israel. Who was fighting Israel? The Gulf was not fighting Israel. This is true.
The Gulf was cooperating with Israel for the past 15 years.
It's not about making peace with Israel. It's not that. It's about rebuilding alignments in the region to counter the other strategic pillars.
I guess my question is, doesn't this just make solving an Israeli-Palestinian issue much harder? Because now what incentives does Israel have to make peace with the Palestinians? They got one of the biggest carrots that they wanted, which was peace with the rest of the Arab, or peace with a major Arab partner. And if the rest of the dominoes fall, if Oman follows, if Bahrain follows, if Saudi Arabia follows, what incentives now does Israel have?
Yes. In my point of view, the Israelis were not very much unhappy because the Palestinians are asking the Arabs to stay aside, pretending that they want their own sovereignty on their own decision. Look at who was happy because of the pressure Yasser Arafat made on the King Hussein to disengage between Jordan and the West Bank. this what had happened, I think, in 1972, I think, which made the whole Palestinian issue from being a conflict between two states into a conflict between a state and a people who doesn't have any representation, any legal representation. So in the international system, it would have been much better if the Palestinians kept on being, allying themselves with their brother Arabs, entre guillemets, and play a role with them. Look, the disengagement between King Hussein and the West Bank led to this situation now. There is no state called Palestine. While at that moment, it had been a peace between Jordan and the West Bank would have been a part of the peace deal, which is now between Israel and Jordan. So the whole region cannot keep this conflict inflamed and while waiting to what would happen after Yasser Arafat. And especially, there are major tectonic changes in the region, major strategic changes in the region that you cannot wait. You cannot just make the whole region waiting for Mr. Abbas to have to change his mind. So would it help? I think it would help, for example, because this process, it would be in danger if from one side there isn't a momentum created around it to give it more viable flesh, as I said, but on the other side, from the Israelis, if they will kill more Palestinians, if they will continue to suffocate the West Gaza, if they will continue to confront, this will make this situation unbearable. And I think this will destroy the whole process. This could be revocable. Simply, it could be revocable.
Is there anybody else that wants to say a goodbye question to Samir?
Did I talk too much?
You had to say what you had to say.
I'm sorry.
Nick, do you want to say anything, ask anything before we head home?
No, I'm good. I'll leave the table to any other students that might have any questions.
Mark, this is Essay, and I'd like to thank Samir for giving us his perspective and illuminating us. And I hope the agreement between the stabilization agreement between Israel and the UAE gives both sides a big stake. And I think the Israelis now have a little bit more to lose because yes, they did gain stabilization recognition from the UAE, but they now want to use that to gain similar things from other countries. So I think on net, they'll be a little bit more measured and balanced. But Samir, the point that you made resonated with me most powerfully was I view in many ways today, the barriers that keep young Muslims from being ready to be educated, to be able to work with people across the board of different faiths and different national origins in creating a better life for their own people as well as for the world. We are increasingly in a world where collaboration across faiths, across national origins, across different points of view is the key to success in the future. And there's been past baggage that has been keeping young Muslims from achieving that. On another note, I sponsor Palestinian students to attend one of the top universities in Israel, like the IDC. And the letters I get from those young women who go for advanced studies at the IDC are amazing and very touching. And my whole view is that, yes, I could participate in the boycott, and who benefits? Nobody. But by sponsoring these students, I have young Muslim Palestinian women who get equipped with tools and techniques, not only education-wise, but in the process to deal with Jews, to deal with people of other faiths, and to collaborate with them in creating success for all. So I really appreciate the insight that you brought to the table.
May I just have a small comment? As a Syrian, from on my side, and also I can say this is happening all over the region. There is a collapse of the perspective of the Islamist agenda. if you go to the most pious man in Homs, who is totally against the regime, he will never accept the Muslims to return to the Islamists, the fanatics to return to rule Homs as they did for 3 years, which means their capability of governance and bringing about new perspective is totally disclosed now as bankrupt. So at the end of the day, why I'm saying that I'm optimistic that you will see lots of manifestations of this, young people who had lost their belief in this Islamist fanatism, and people who do not see their future in the conflict, they will be really willing to incorporate and to share and to study and to exchange with their their friends all over the region. And I think what this step had made is it had broken this ice, which an obstacle, a real psychological obstacle among those people who are, we don't know, will we be condemned by the media, our society, how would it be reacting to us, etc., etc. Now things are changing. And when a state comes and do it, it's much better than the peace between Jordan, Egypt, and Israel, because this is now something that will have, and it is intended and it is supported to become a public operation. And this is the intention of the United Arab Emirates. And we need to give it the momentum so that those people will see no scruples, no difficulties, no big obstacles, and jump over their the traditional paradigm about anti-Semitism, anti-Israeli, anti-Jews, which is a major psychological shift.
Well, I think we should all be thankful, at least that 1 million people in the Emirates that are citizens seem to be supporting this. And that's what you're referring to. It's a small model, but the question is what the publics in the rest of the Gulf and the rest of the Arab world are willing to do, and the leadership, how creative they will be. So we look forward to seeing how this plays out, but also to getting clarity about what we think we want to support and to be active in supporting it in ways that are productive. So we're not just sidelined, but we're also participating in an outcome that we think might be a better one. And maybe this is the beginning of something better.
Now the work among Palestinians is the most important thing. To empower them, to allow them, especially among the young generation, and to give them hope. If they become hopeless, they will go to violence and fanatism. It's the moment now to act the Palestinian society, to make it powerful, even confronting their own political leaders about their future, how they see. I made a study in Damascus there about the attitude of Palestinian women regarding the refugee issue. And you would be shocked by the creativity of women when you introduce the gender issue here as a factor. The creativity to really dismantle the whole animosity and really to have new paradigms of thinking about the refugee issue rather than just destroying Israel. And so I was surprised by this creativity and this. So we need to address the society, the young people, the women, the gender issue. This will create lots of new opportunities that hadn't been explored practically.
Well, it's certainly possible. The atmospherics in the 1990s, I don't know if you remember this or are a part of it, but we created twin cities, 12 Palestinian cities with 12 Israeli cities, where young people in high school were crossing borders and actually spending time with each other and building up community developments. It was an amazing period. but I think that the people-to-people project in general was not big enough or productive enough associated with Oslo, or even today. There's no crossing borders.
I have a small comment. I was very much shocked, negatively shocked, by some attitudes of the young generation in Israel. And those people are thinking that, you know, we are so safe, nobody can threaten Israel in the next 100 years. So why to bother about those savage Arabs? And this had been said in a way or another explicitly by very important people among the young generation. And this attitude would be very dangerous, not only for the Arabs, Palestinians, etc., but even for Israel itself. It cannot continue to eat popcorn.
This is the first time I've heard eating the popcorn. I get it.
Just watch the region collapsing around them and we are safe. This is an illusion.
Samir, I want to thank you for giving us time to hear your big thoughts on this. And we look forward to collaboration and work with you in the States. And we have some ideas about some projects. And maybe sometime next week we'll get a chance to talk.
I'm really happy. I'm really, you are encouraging me in my thoughts. I think this is a very important moment for myself. I fought for peace for more than 40 years. And now there is a lure of light coming out of the tunnel. So we need to work together. There is lots to do. I have lots of programs, including, as I said, for Saudi Arabia, including for the whole region, for the Palestinians. We have lots of agendas we can do. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you to the students that got on and for some guests. And we'll get you more information. We're not through Zooming. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take care.